what if somebody sets off a nuke in a city? What do you do if this plume of radiation, you only have 3 hours till it starts drifting over the city? The first thing to go on radiation is the stem cells in the jejunum, which is right at the top of the small intestines. Right after the stomach, you go into the jejunum. Is there a method to treat 1 million people with a protectant from radiation exposure? Because after 9/11, after this bombing of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, we had to come up with a drug to be administered orally. You can't do IVs quickly. The drug has to be active post or 30 minutes pre-irradiation. So the idea is that we were checking these mice, we developed this drug. Here's the survivals. If you give them 10 gray of radiation, a mouse can live. If you give a mouse 12 gray of radiation, they're almost all dead. But once we give this compound, WR2721, look at that, they're all surviving. They're all surviving. They just keep eating, they're surviving. Okay, we're going to talk today about how and why to launch a startup company from the university. So we're going to look at some companies, why to start a company. We're going to look at intellectual property, what are the steps in starting a company. And I'll give you some advice for founders and CEOs of an academically funded startup, alternative routes to commercialization, and what can Rice provide for you in doing this. And then the genesis of 2 companies. All right, so here's a list of companies that I've started over the past 8 years. So what happened is I used to always license things to big companies for many years, and it was always a disaster. I mean, because what happens is the technology gets into the company, somebody in the company is really excited about it, and then that person retires, that person leaves the company, and people aren't excited about it anymore. And so what I found is it's much better, and I think I've told you this before, it's much better to start your own company, and then big companies can partner with that company and do a joint venture or something like that. So here's a list of the different companies, and we've touched on a few of these already. We've mentioned some of these, and we'll mention other ones as we go along. So I've been through this a few times. Why start one? Why even consider starting a company? Well, the upside is that you get to develop your own ideas. And maybe you'll get a lot of fame and fortune. Maybe you'll be like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk, fly to Mars or something. But even without that, you meet a whole different set of people. You'll meet people who work in finance, and you get an education, and you'll satisfy anxieties and midlife crises. At some point in your life, you might think, well, what am I doing with my life? And this happens especially to professors, because they feel like they're not making enough money sometimes, and so they think, oh, I'll start a company, and they end up usually losing money, losing more money. But it's something to try. Here's an important question. Why would anyone believe that a man named Jesus died and rose from the dead? If you don't believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, send an email to tour@drjamestour.org, and we'll set up a meeting, and I will tell you about why I embrace the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The downside is it can be, if you're from the academics like me, it can be the abuse of the academic mission. So say I'm too interested in my company, and then what happens is I don't even prepare for class. I come in here and I stand up here like a buffoon, and I don't really know what to talk about. So that happens. I mean, when people get too involved with their own companies. You can take away time from your basic science, and the business world is pretty cruel. Academics is not that tough of a place, in the sense that people are generally respectful of one another. That's not as much the case in the business world, from what I have found. And then the other thing that happens when you start a company, say I start it with another professor, you can end up stressing relationships with that professor. And that happened to me. The first company I started was back in 1999. It was with 3 other professors, and we had collaborated for years between us. And then as the company started going, one person was working harder than another, and he felt that he was working harder than the others, and so they got crosswise with them, and so everything's nice on day one, but it doesn't always end up that way. So I have always decided I'm not going to start a company with another professor anymore. That's something that I just won't do. because I don't want to stress those relationships. Then it's dealing with equity ravenous attorneys. Attorneys will say, okay, we'll only charge you half as much as we would charge you, but give us, some equity in the company. Give us 10% of the company or 5% of the company. Don't do it. My advice is don't do it, because they're going to charge you the same amount anyway. Because you can never really check an attorney's clock. You just have to take their word for it that they spent X number of hours. So don't do it. And then you deal with high maintenance business people, salespeople, happens all the time. You say, okay, you'll get paid this much to do this job. And the next day they're back in your office wanting more money. And you say, well, I thought we kind of had an agreement between us. And they say, well, I'm doing this now too. And so it's difficult, whereas it's much easier in the university. All my graduate students get paid the same. That's it. You don't like it? That's set by the department. It's sort of like a socialistic system. You're all getting the same. And so it's much easier to deal with this. Now, personally, what I do, I learned in the first company back in '99 what not to ever do again. And so I'm never an officer or director in the company, meaning I'm not on the board of directors, I'm not a CEO or a chief scientific officer or anything. I might sit on a scientific advisory board, and then that way I give them some advice for 6 months, but then they're quickly beyond me after 6 months. And so I have no what's called fiduciary responsibility, because that's taken seriously by the business world, by courts. If you are an employee of the company, or if you're on the board, you have a fiduciary responsibility for the good of that company. And that becomes a real conflict, because I have a fiduciary responsibility to Rice University, because they pay my salary. And so I don't bear any fiduciary responsibility. And that's the way I manage having so many companies, is that, I just help to found them, and there's other people that run it, and they're supposed to just send me the check in the mail is essentially what they're supposed to do. But it's not really that glorious. I mean, there's a lot of work you have to still put into it. But I have no official position there. All right, so intellectual property. How do you, that's IP protection. So this took off in 1980 because of the Bayh-Dole Act. And so I was like your age at that time. I was an undergraduate when Bayh-Dole Act started. There were no startup companies, very, very few. There were essentially no startup companies coming out of university. It just didn't happen. And then the Bayh-Dole Act came in. And that allowed now for instead of the federal government owning everything that had been done through the research dollars in the university, the federal government. So nobody started companies, because if I start a company, it's all going to be owned by the federal government. And when it's owned by the federal, why do I want to work so hard? And nothing ever got really taken from the university into a company. When this act came, it says that what's done on federal grants is owned by the university. And the university can license it to whom they want. So the university now could license it to the professor, to the inventors, or to a group that the inventors of it say, and then they could start up companies. And it exploded. Startup companies exploded as a result of that act. I mean, it started out slow. People realized, hey, I can start a company, and then it took off. And I remember I think it was 99 or 2000, a group from the British government came to my office and said, how come there's so many startup companies coming out of the US? And that was the dot-com boom time. And I said, Bayh-Dole Act. And they were like, what's that? And I described this to them. And then they went back to the UK, and the UK passed legislation like this. Boom, startup companies started coming out of their universities. When you allow people to capitalize on their own inventions, then everything goes much better. Everybody wants to do this. If they're going to, this is why the socialist system doesn't work, in the sense that if what you're going to do is just there for the government, people don't want to do it. But if you're going to benefit yourself, you and your family are going to benefit, boom, everybody wants to do it. You file a disclosure. A patent disclosure is just, in fact, I just filed one about an hour ago. It just maps out what you've done and what you're claiming, your invention. Sort of like what you hand in every week is sort of like a patent disclosure in a sense. I mean, but there's a few more details to it, but not much more. And you just outline what you've done. Usually you have to have done something. You don't have to have done something, but usually there is something that you have done. Yours is mind confined, but even that is okay. you can file a patent disclosure on that. And that doesn't cost much. If you're filing it yourself, it's only like a couple $100. You can file it with the U.S. Patent Office online. If you pay a lawyer to do it, they're depending on how much work they can do, it's going to cost. It's going to cost more. But just you file that disclosure. Actually, I'm sorry, the disclosure is what I filed to the university. That then is converted to a provisional patent, and that's what this is. So I file a disclosure that says what I did, then they convert it into a provisional patent. So they will hire a lawyer either to just put a cover letter on top of that and some obligatory information, and then they file that with the U.S. Patent Office, or they put a lot more work into it, really beefing it up and making it much stronger. Once you file that provisional, once you file a provisional patent, you have 1 year before you have to file the real patent. And that can give you 1 year to develop it more and more before you start spending real money. Provisionals are very inexpensive to file. So universities are happy to file provisionals. It costs them a few $100s and they file a provisional, generally. Sometimes if you hire a lawyer to write a lot around the provisional because you've already got a lot of data, then it can be much stronger. And then after 12 months, you have to convert that either into a U.S. Utility patent, a U.S. patent, or you have to say, no, I want worldwide protection. There's a big difference in cost. Big difference in cost. It used to be if you got U.S. protection, you had 75% of the world market. That's no longer the case. The world is just equalized now. And so, but if you're going to look at filing in the U.S., the total cost over the lifetime of this thing might be $25,000 to $50,000 that you're going to spend on filing a U.S. patent. If you file a PCT means that this is an agreement between many countries saying, hey, if you filed it here, we're okay, we'll take it and we'll consider it here too. You still have to go through every patent office in every country you claim. This is what happens when people don't know what they're doing. Hey, yeah, I want protection in Chad, Africa. I mean, every country you check off is going to start costing you money. Just a quick reminder, this organization is run totally by volunteers, but we do have to pay for the production work. If you could help us out by going to give.jesusandscience.org, we'd appreciate it, or you can click in the description box below. If you can't give, we certainly understand, but please just give us a thumbs up and click subscribe. Thank you. And so you want to think about before you start checking off different countries. For example, I never protect in India. Well, why not? It's a big market. Because they don't observe patents anyway. They don't observe patents. So they will allow people within India to break any patent, to just do whatever anybody has protected anywhere in the world. So they don't observe it. And because of that, the world doesn't work a lot with India on intellectual property. I never file patents in Russia. And I don't file patents in Russia because if you go to defend your patent in Russia, somebody in Russia is violating your patent, you'll go to Moscow and you'll never come back. So you'll get run over on the way to the courthouse. And so you don't even bother. So there are some locales you don't even bother. But usually what I will check off, I'll check off the EU, and you can check certain domains within the EU, and that's covered by one patent consideration. And usually China, because that is a huge market, and maybe Japan and South Korea if it's an electronics type patent. And PCT allows all of that. There are some countries that are not part of the PCT, and the notable one is Taiwan. More electronic chips are made in Taiwan than anywhere else in the world, but they are not part of the PCT. You have to file with them separately. So that's kind of what I went over here. But just so that you understand the cost, this will tell us the cost. Again, a U.S. patent over the lifetime might cost you $100,000 because after a few years, you have to start giving money to the U.S. Patent Office. Like it might cost you $5,000 for that year. And the next year costs you $7,000 because they assume you're making more money now. And so they charge you to maintain your patent. If you have good coverage, say U.S., Canada, EU, China, Japan, that's going to cost you $250,000 to $350,000 over the lifetime of the patent. Whereas if it's U.S., it might be $50,000 to $100,000 over the lifetime. So you see the difference here. If you want worldwide protection, you're going to pay a whole lot more money. And you say, well, okay, we'll pay that. But if you're a startup company, how many of these things can you file? You know, your costs can really start going up. And sometimes it's more important than the specific strength of the intellectual property is the ability to start a company, get investment based upon what might not be very strong IP, knowing that the intellectual property and the know-how will be strengthened through development. Meaning that you don't have great protection right now. One of the things that helps a lot is to be first to market. When you're first to market, you can garner a lot of the market share. And that's particularly true in software. In software, you can grab a lot of the market share early on. For example, when eBay started, they wanted some mechanism to have credit card payments. It turned out, so that was Elon Musk, but it turned out that Peter Thiel had already started PayPal. And PayPal already had such a dominant position in the market for taking people's credit card information and everything that it was hard for eBay to break in because market share can be grabbed, large swaths of it, like 40% of the market share can be taken within the first year. It's huge. And so that's why there was an agreement then between PayPal and eBay. They came together. And that's sort of how that relationship bonded. And I think, you know, I've read about this, that Peter Thiel actually met at some cafe or something right there in Palo Alto with Elon Musk, and they kind of struck up this deal. So the steps to starting a company from the academy, meaning from the university, what are the steps involved here? Well, seek counsel from the intellectual property office. We call it the Office of Tech Transfer. Go and talk to them. They'll walk you through this. And talk to people in the business school. They've been through this a lot. So you make them your friends. And don't feel that, well, the university is going to take it. As an undergraduate, you owe nothing to the university. Some universities are not like that. I mean, if you discover something in the university, they try to get it from you even when you're an undergraduate. But if you're not getting paid by the university, that belongs to you. So what you do in the Oshman Engineering Design Kitchen, that belongs to you. Because you're not getting paid by the university. If you're a graduate student, you're making money from the university, or a postdoc or a professor, everything you do is owned by the university. You can't say, well, I did this at home and I didn't do it in my office. It doesn't matter. It still belongs to them. And because you can imagine what people would say, like, well, I thought of this while I was in the shower. So it's really doesn't belong to no, it belongs to the university. And you sign that when you sign your employment agreement. All right, so this is the difference here. You have to write a business plan, and so you have to write a business plan. To just talk about this business, and you make the university your friend. Don't look at them as an enemy. And then you have to choose the board of directors. And I would advise you don't just go around and choose your best friends, because they don't know anything about that market space unless they really know a lot about it. But you want a board of directors, you want expertise in that area. So say you've thought of a new design for a bicycle. What you want to do is you want to hire people on the board, because generally you're not paying board members other than with equity. You're giving them equity in the company for their service. And that doesn't come right away, or else they take their stock and they run after one day. You know, you serve for a year, you'll get this much. You serve for 3 years, you get this much. And so you always give it in tranches. But if it's, say, a new design for a bicycle, see if you can hire a lawyer on the board, be on the board, because then they give you free legal advice. So a lawyer on the board is free legal. So the advice you get from the board is essentially free. You're not paying cash for that. And they know, presumably a lawyer who knows something about bicycles. They're really into bicycles. Or they have worked in the past for a bicycle company. That sort of thing. And ask your parents. A lot of times your parents are connected with people in their network, in their community. They say, oh yeah, I know so-and-so does this. And you can begin to ask those people, and if they can't serve, they know somebody who can serve. And by the way, Brandon, you need to fill out a form because you're working in my lab. So around this sort of topic. So see me afterward. I forgot to have you do that. Okay, the other thing is, how do you raise funds? Now, you can go to small business innovation research grants. These are SBIR, STTR, SBTT. These are government grants that you can get that fund small business. Just like I get grant money into the university to pay for my graduate students to do work, you can get grant money, and this is non-dilutable, meaning that you never have to pay it back. Now, they check to make sure that you're a real company, that you're using it in the right way, but that's great. The next thing is angels. These are usually friends and family. And you know, you go to your mom and your dad and you say, hey, look, I'm starting this company. We're going to need like $50,000 just to get this thing going. And they're like, are you sure you're doing this right? And they don't want to hurt your feelings, so they give you the $50,000 or something like that. That's friends and family. And so then you go to your uncle and you gave him the same story, and you go to your other uncle and your other aunt, and then you get money from the family. They're usually going to lose it. It's usually what happens. And they take terrific haircuts. What that means is that when you get the next round of investors, they like to have all these other investors crammed down, where they take their equity and they just cram it down. And you say, well, they don't like it. I mean, these are your friends and family. Institutional investors don't like it. They don't like all those non-sophisticated people there because they cause trouble. Because every day, you know, when are we going to start making our money? They don't know how to really do this, and they don't like doctors being on this thing, for example. And because doctors, you know, they only make their money when they're working. It's like lawyers only make money when they're working. The business folks can be out playing golf and they're still making money. And that's the difference. And so the doctors and the lawyers like this idea of, hey, I don't even have to work and I'm making money. And so they don't understand that this thing is going to take time. So they get crammed down. You can work with venture capitalists. Venture capitalists are the ones who initial seed funding into your company. They will put in, say, anywhere from $250,000 up to, I mean, it can go up to $100 million. Big VC firms can do it. Most VC firms, you know, that are moderate size will go from, say, $250K to $2 or $3 million to start an effort like that. But they have a very high ROI, meaning return on investment. They have very strict terms. You say, why are you getting so much of this company? I'm the one doing all the work. And he or she who puts in the money essentially owns much of the company. I mean, that's just the way it is. People who put up the money. And they have a high return on investment because only 1 in 10 startups really starts making significant money. Only 1 in 10. So you got 9 out of 10 that are failing, so you better have a high return on investment because only 1 in 10 of your startups is going to be successful that you invest in. Now, the good companies have a much higher ratio than that, but that's because they're self-selecting. They are so good, everybody wants to work with them, so they're able to sift out the bad ones and only get the really good deals. So their success rate is much higher. The smaller VC firms are small or don't have it. Then there's a range of investing that's called growth equity. And that's in like the 100 to 300 million range. That's a growth equity company. And then there's a private equity company that's, say, about 400 million to billions, where big companies need a lot of cash infused. And that's where they'll come in. But early on, it's the venture capitalists. And you want to choose a CEO best if they have domain experience. In other words, they've worked in this market area before. You just go ahead and you grab your beer drinking buddy. I mean, it just generally doesn't work out. For the inventors to do this, it can be great. Inventors have passion. They want to see this thing through. But you got to realize this is a long, long, hard road. You know, I read the book by Isaacson. He wrote the biography of Elon Musk. And it's fascinating, all the work that Elon Musk would always sleep under his desk. I mean, it's hard. It's a lot of work. And when you're CEO of the company, you don't think you're eating out every day. You might be eating out at like McDonald's every day, but that's about it. It's just a lot of very, very hard work. I read the book by Isaacson's book on the biography of Steve Jobs. Same thing. It's an awful lot of work. And when you're running a small company, you fix the toilets. You do everything that needs to be done. And this satisficing means you're taking the most available option. this guy's out of work, so he has nothing else to do. Let's hire him. No, that's the guy you don't want to hire, that he happens to be out of work. There's a reason why he's out of work. And to have small company experience can really help, because small companies are very different than running big companies. Big companies, you have a lot of, it's still a lot of work, but you designate things. Small company, you do everything. I'm telling you, you mop the floor, you fix the plumbing, everything. All right, so advice for aspiring CEOs. Yeah, it's a great opportunity. You're going to have an enormous amount of energy. You have to understand the irrational scientific mindset. When you're dealing with professors, we are irrational in many ways. So there's this irrational scientific mindset. And the problem with that there's this problem is that we're always, here I can't even get out my sentence. We're irrational, and we jump around from subject to subject, and it's very hard to deal with a professor. Business people find people like me very hard to deal with, and I can understand why, because I think of something and I want to divert directions. They have to go to a product. Dealing with this university administration can be really hard, because sometimes they overvalue their intellectual property. This blip on an oscilloscope. Well, the professor says this is worth a lot. This is worth a lot. And the business guy is like, it's not worth anything. If you can't put that blip into a box that somebody's going to buy, it's not worth anything. I don't care if it means you're going to win a Nobel Prize. Fine, win your Nobel Prize, but I can't sell your Nobel Prize. It's a whole different ballgame. And then you have to have clear lines of demarcation. The professor always wants money from the company to flow into their academic laboratory. You don't want that happening. Unless the professor's very good, and that's the cost of buying into this IP. You have to really manage the budgets tightly. You want to have a proper board of directors. I would recommend you have less than 2 academic scientists on the board. Less than 2, all right? So never have more than 1. Never have more than 1 professor on your board. And if you can help from having a professor on the board, that's the best. Remember I told you I'm never on the board on these companies? I don't think like a business person. And I love science. They love money. They love making a product, and that's what they have to do. They have now a fiduciary responsibility. That responsibility doesn't care at all about science. They care about making money for the investors, for the shareholders. That's their bottom line. And if that company goes public, then they have the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, and even if it's a private company, when you're pulling in private money, money from individuals, you have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize shareholder value by all legal means. And you have to have this professor versus product engineer. Again, professor can be going along, studying something, and then all of a sudden they see this out here. They go, that is amazing. And they'd be like, no, we have to deliver this product. Yeah, I'll do that. Trust me, I'll do that. 90% of the professor's CPU is on that exciting thing over there. A product engineer just spits tobacco. They don't care about Nobel Prizes. They just deliver the product. Just deliver the product. That's what you want in your company. Just deliver the product to me. And then you have to prepare for lead-ridden limbs. If you're a CEO, I mean, you get beat up from every side. It's a very, very hard position. All right, alternative to starting companies. So you can publish without patenting. That's easy. No patent examiner dialogue. Just because you file a patent, it's not accepted. You got to go back and forth between you can file a patent. It's very different between filing and receiving a patent. Receiving a patent, you have had a long dialogue back and forth in writing, and where the patent examiner says, no, you can't have this claim, you can't have this claim. You say, no, I should be able to have this because of this. And so you're going back, it's years. So the disclosure that I just filed today, I will start having this dialogue with a patent examiner in about 5 years. The students are long gone, they're drinking iced tea somewhere. I'm dealing with this. Every time I file a patent disclosure, and I have filed 1 patent disclosure per month for the last 25 years. as long as I've been at Rice. And before I came to Rice, I was filing. But at Rice, I've kept count now. On average, 1 per month. And so this is 5 years later, I will now be dealing with this with the patent examiner. And then that dealing would be for 1.5 years or 2 years. I'm going back and forth with lawyers to get a patent approved. Once it's approved, that means something. Now, that doesn't mean that you normally have it. The only way you really have it firmed up is if it's gone to court, somebody's contested it, and then the courts have said, no, this patent's going to hold. And so there's a lot involved in this. You don't have to deal with patent examiners if you just publish, but it might never be used. If the technology was not patented, nobody wants to spend money working on this thing, developing it into a product, because there's no protection. Anybody else can just look at your final product and copy it if you don't have any protection. And it possibly violates university policy. Technically, the university wants us to file disclosures and turn those into patents. But they don't enforce that, so you don't really have to. And what's in it for the university? You say, oh, the universities are making tons of money in all these patents. No, the vast majority of university offices of technology transfer are in the red. They're bleeding money, because there's not too many university patents that have made money. There are some that have made a lot. If you go to Harvard, you go to MIT, you go to Stanford, those have made a lot of money. But in general, they haven't. The ones that are the biggest are like cisplatin out of Michigan, which is a cancer chemotherapy agent. But the biggest, from what I understand, maybe that's been surpassed now, was Gatorade from the Florida Gators. I mean, this was a huge, huge patent. And I remember when Gatorade first came out, I was just a kid. And I remember this one of the tennis instructors was drinking Gatorade, and I'd seen the commercials. Wow, what's that taste like? Do you feel really strong now? Do you have a lot of energy? Because we'd never had these sort of drinks before. An energy drink where you get energy just by drinking it. And then, you get the stuff and you're really like, this is just like any other drink. There's nothing special here. All right. So you could license it to a company, and that's what I did. I would file patents and then I'd license it to companies. You might get some research funding. I've gotten research funding out of it, continued patents. You might get consulting with the company. The upside is you sleep much better if you don't have a startup company. And the downside is you have no major liquidity event. But if you have a startup company, it's a lot of work and a lot of people are bothering you all the time. Now, even if you don't start a company, I could still make money from the patent, because anything that the university gets, say the university gets $1, the inventors share 37.5 cents at Rice University. And that number varies depending on what university you're in, but it's somewhere usually around that number. And within that 37.5 cents, that is divided between me and my students who are on that patent, but it's not divided 1-to-1. It's divided in a way that's commensurate with the input of that student. It might be 1-to-1, but it doesn't have to be. All right, so what can Rice do? Rice has all of these. There's the Rice Alliance, which is the biggest. It's program of its kind. It was the first and the biggest, and it's still the biggest in the U.S. with the most prize money. So they will bring in groups of investors to hear student pitches. And so this is like twice a year, and you could get like $1 million if you're number one, but it's usually in kind. This firm, this law firm will do $100,000 of free work for you. This would, that sort of thing. And then there's OwlSpark, which is really geared toward the undergraduate. This is more geared toward the graduate student. There's the Oshman Engineering Design Kitchen, where you can do all this fabrication work and you don't owe anything back to the university. Same at the Ion. The Ion, which is just up the road, you can use that facility. There's the Johnson & Johnson Innovation Lab, which is not far from here. It's in the medical center. So you can get tied in with that if it's some medical device technology. And a lot of medical device technologies have been they've come up with these ideas for undergraduates. I remember a few years ago there was this one that when people are operated on, and if they have a big gut, what happens is that gut is like putting a bowling ball on their stomach, and now they're intubated, so they're, something's breathing for them, but there's a bowling ball sitting on their stomach, right here, there's bowling. And so these students developed this thing that they took breast pumps that are for expressing if you're nursing a baby, and they took these breast pumps and they put it on the belly, and then it was just this suspension system that actually just pulled it up and just lifted by suction the belly. And so it relieved a lot of the pressure on the stomach. And so that's a pretty neat invention. There was nothing to deal with these big bellied people that had all this pressure pushing on them. And so this was a good invention. And so that invention, I think, was licensed, and the company came and, they make it much sleeker, and they have this thing, and, these things, that will lift up the stomach. So there's also the hackerspace, Houston's hackerspace. And so that is a Houston-based fabrication lab you can go into. You don't have to buy the drill press. You don't have to buy the lathe. You can go in and make it right there. And there's this Liu Idea Lab for students. And so lots of things you can access here. All right, you want to learn how to speak to investors. You can't get into all the details of the science. Even when I am speaking to you about the science, trust me, I'm keeping it science light. We're not going into deep details. When you speak to investors, it's even less than that. You're just globally going out. You usually get 10 minutes for a talk, sometimes 3 minutes. In 3 minutes, it's called an elevator pitch. You got to pitch your thing. And then they're deciding whether they want to hear more based on your 3-minute pitch, and then the next 3 minutes. And then they'll come back to you, okay, give us 10 minutes now. And then if they like that 10 minutes, they'll sit down with you and you can go more detail. So no details in the scientific data. You just want to talk high level. What can this do? You want to be exciting. You want it to be exciting and passionate. If you come in and, I guess this is a good idea. I thought of it. I think it's a good idea. It'd be good to get your opinion. Nobody wants that. They want to see fire in the belly. They want to see no grass grows under this person's feet. They are so excited. They're going to work day and night to make this happen. That's what they want to see. Those are the people who have higher chance of being successful. If you can't work yourself up to being passionate, get somebody else. Get your friend, get your colleague to do it, to do the presentation. It's very important. And you want to get them coming back for more, and you have to be quick with follow-up. So when they send you an email, hey, we'd like to get together with you, don't think about that for 2 days. Well, when's the best time? No, you respond immediately. I'm yours. What works for you? Just like that. And then if you had a dentist appointment, cancel the dentist appointment and you meet with them. All right, so let me give you some examples. We started this company in 1999, Molecular Electronics Corp. This is where I learned everything not to do. This started during the dot-com boom. This started, it was so easy to raise money back then. And so this was to make electronic memory with no moving parts that was non-volatile. So non-volatile memory used to be a magnetic drive spinning around. And so you could shut your computer and it stayed on that magnetic drive. Nobody at that time knew that a product was going to come out called flash memory, where you could dump electrons into a deep trench capacitor and hold it there when you turn the power off. And so we were going to store it in molecules. So we started this company. But because of that, I learned a lot about how to passivate surfaces, how to protect surfaces. And so then that company went under, but we had learned a lot about how to protect surfaces. So we started this product called Jack 10. Jim, Austin, Chris. That's where the name Jack came from. And 10 because we just chose a number, because it was like WD-40. So we were Jack 10. And it was just going to be to protect surfaces. And so then Richard came in. He wanted to call it R-Jack. It's not. They're not a punch. But anyway, then I just made it A76. I learned this from Jeff Bezos spoke here in the summer of '99. He spoke right here in this building, in the auditorium right there. And I remember he got up, he said, it was one of those blazing hot August days. I mean, just so hot. And he said, you know, this was in 1999. He said, many people would say that the best invention of the 20th century was the internet. I'm here to tell you it was the air conditioner. And he gave his talk. But somebody asked him, why'd you choose the name Amazon? He said, I needed something easy to spell, because there was Barnes and Noble. Well, how do you spell Barnes and Noble? Does Barnes have an E in it? Is it Noble? Is it N-O-B-E-L or N-O-B-L-E? Who knows? But Amazon is very easy to spell and began with an A. He always said he wanted to be at the top of the list. So that's why I chose A. I mean, nobody can beat you out if you're just one letter A. And so it's A76. And then when I sold the company, there was Phillips 76 was going to sue them, saying that was too close to their name in the same space, you know, a lubricant, corrosion protection. So they changed it to Rust Patrol. So anyway, I went in the lab with my own hands, and so this is, I remember I asked this, I said, take my picture, because I haven't been in a lab in years working in my own hands. This is probably the last time. So this was like in 2014 or 2015 that I did this. So I went in the lab, that's a salt fog box, and that's in my lab here on campus, and I was developing this rust protector. My youngest son he was 15 at the time. I said, come on in with me, we're going to develop a corrosion inhibitor. So he came in the lab with me, and that was back in the days that young people could come in the labs. Now we have all these restrictions. And anyway, we were working away that night, and he says, Dad, how long is this going to take? I said, I don't know, 6 months or a year we'll come up with something. He's like, 6 months or a year? Dad, I have a life. And he never came back. He never came back to the lab. I mean, it's crazy. But he could have seen how this was developed. And so came up with this corrosion inhibitor. Now, this is an independent test. This isn't my test. This was an independent test. This was in a 5% salt fog box where you took a metal plate and you hung it in the salt fog box, steel. It was a carbon steel plate. And you'd hang it in the box, and after 47 days, it's 1010 carbon steel. After 47 days, they would come out. So they tested our Rust Patrol against a bunch of different things that were on the market, and one of those had no protection on it. You have to guess which one of those is Rust Patrol. Any idea? I know, I'll tell you. Okay, so you see how good Rust Patrol is. I mean, it's just amazing coating. And I developed this with my own hands. Look at what WD-40 is. WD-40 is terrible. Here's an uncoated metal piece. You know, this is just getting totally eaten away. This is a corrosion protection material on the market. So is this. This is the top of the line. Corrosion X is top of the line corrosion protection until Rust Patrol came out. What would you spray on your metal? It's good stuff. And so this is 47 days, so that's not even 2 months. This is after 6 months in a 10% salt fog box. The other was 5. This was my own test, and it's 6 months. I mean, this stuff's amazing. So you want to protect rust. And so here is when it got out into the field. This was one of the users tested CRC against Rust Patrol, and that was their result. And this is a marine part for something. I mean, so it's a good product. So I sold this company twice. How do you sell a company twice? So I sold the company. There were some students in the business school, and I didn't want to work with students because they're just young. They don't know what they're doing. And but they begged me, and oh, come on. So I sold it to them, and they had to pay a certain amount. And they didn't run the company well, and they only paid half of the amount. So it came back to me. When it came back to me, I sold it again. And so I ended up selling the company twice. So that was Rust Patrol. And then the question came up about how could you save 1 million people with chemicals? How could you save 1 million people? And so I'm just taking you through these quickie little companies that I had started. So is there a method to treat 1 million people with a protectant from radiation exposure? Because after 9/11, after this bombing of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, and there was this push, what if somebody sets off a nuke in a city and this plume of radiation is coming? You can't exit a city quickly. I mean, when we try to exit Houston in a week, we know a hurricane is coming. It takes like a week to exit the city. What do you do with this plume of radiation? You only have 3 hours till it starts drifting over the city. So you had to come up with a drug to be administered orally. You can't do IVs quickly. Just pick it up at the supermarket, grab your dose, drink it. The drug has to protect the stem cell crypts in the jejunum. The first thing to go on radiation is not the bone, is not in the stem cells in the bone. It's the stem cells in the jejunum, which is right at the top of the small intestines. Right after the stomach, you go into the jejunum. There's stem cells in there that protect the lining of the small intestines. The drug has to be active post or 30 minutes pre-irradiation. So we started working with MD Anderson. So I got this grant from DARPA. Lots of money was being thrown at protecting people from these sort of things. And so the idea is that we were checking these mice, we developed this drug, but we had a control. We had a control system. And I said, as the control, let's take a known radioprotectant that's used in the clinic so that if they're going to dose somebody with a high dose of radiation, they inject this around it, not on the tumor that they're going to hit, but around it. They inject this in the bloodstream to protect the surrounding area. I said, let's use that as just the control system. So we were giving the mice 12 grays of whole body radiation. Doses over 10 gray usually cause death by what's called GI syndrome. You lose the stem cells on the jejunum, and then whenever you eat, bacteria goes into your system. It gets through your small intestines into your system, and you die of bacterial infections. You get diarrhea, and you get GI syndrome, and people usually die after a month. Mice die after 2 weeks. Cancer patients usually get 1 to 2 gray 5 times a week at a specific location. A gray is 1 joule per kilogram of radiation. We were giving doses of 12 gray. This is a lot of gray. So here's what a slice of the jejunum from a mouse looks like. There are little things, these little things right here at the edges are what are called crypts. In these crypts form these stem cells that generate cells that coat these villi. These villi give you the high surface area in your intestines to have absorption through that. And these villi are coated with cells that protect bacteria from getting in. You know, on your hand is covered with bacteria. You know, it's just covered with bacteria. Every time you eat, you're eating all this bacteria. Why don't we die? We don't die because of these coatings that protect us. But what happens is after you've been exposed to 12 gray of radiation, look, the crypts are just blown to bits. Your villi are just destroyed. You have no coating over these villi. You eat, bacteria get in, you get GI syndrome, you die. That's what you die of when you've gotten exposed to radiation, high doses of radiation. So here's what the crypts look like, these little things here. They coat the villi. Here's after exposure to radiation. Look, the crypts are just gone. So if a mouse has received 0 gray of radiation, you count the crypts in that circle. It's around 160. Every mouse is a little bit different. It's around 160. If you give 12 gray of radiation, they only have about 15 crypts left. That mouse is going to die. All right? But now, the time we've cut out their jejunum, they're already dead. They've been euthanized, but they wouldn't survive. Then what we had noticed is that with the amifostine, the control, if we gave it orally, in the gut, or even orally, gave it by gavage, just orally, we could really protect these crypts. They were surviving, and this was just the control. This was a known drug from the 1960s that was being screened. And this is what's used in the clinic. There's no stereogenic centers. There's no chiral centers there. It was so easy. So we could really protect the jejunum. Here's no treatment, and here's 12 gray of radiation. We were protecting the duodenum and the jejunum. Now, why is the duodenum also important? It's because this guy came to visit me, Dr. Cullen Taniguchi. This is an amazing story. He was interviewing at MD Anderson Cancer Center. He was at Stanford finishing up his residency in GI oncology. Interviewing there, he heard about this. He came from there during his interview trip to visit me. He said, if you can protect the jejunum, will be able to protect the duodenum. The duodenum is this little piece that goes from the stomach to the small intestines. It's a little curved piece, and it goes from high acidity to basicity, from acidic to alkaline over a short distance. It's this amazing material that can take this, and without that you die. So if you have pancreatic cancer kills a lot of people. If you have a tumor in the tail of the pancreas, that's fine. You can just cut it off. You can't do surgery here in the head of the pancreas because you have an artery runs right through the middle of the pancreas. And it's too dangerous. You clip that artery, the patient dies. So you can hit that, though, with radiation. Now, you can give drugs, but they don't get through. There's a stroma, a coating. You can hit it with radiation, but there's not enough radiation that you can hit this with, because you need to give doses of 60 to 65 gray of radiation to knock that out. You can only deliver 50, because if you give more than 50, you destroy the duodenum, which is right next to it. So you destroy an important part of the body, the patient's going to die anyway. So you can't give sufficient radiation. So our idea was, we'll give them a drink of this, and then we'll be able to blast this was Cullen's idea, blast that tumor and protect now the duodenum in the process. And so this is the data that showed this, that we could really protect both the duodenum or duodenum. People pronounce it different ways. We could protect it by giving certain dosages of this and hitting it with 12 grays of radiation. So we can do this in the mouse, and that you could see that what you do is you track the body weight. So a normal mouse, their body weight, stays the same and just slowly increases. If you give these 12 gray of radiation, they just die. But if you give this oral dose and you protect them of this compound, it just comes right back to normal. So they get sick for a couple of days, they just don't want to eat much, and then they go right back to eating normally. So you've protected them. And so you can see that this material does not collect in the tumor. We don't want it to collect in the tumor. We only want it to collect in the jejunum and the duodenum. So we don't want it there. We don't want to protect the tumor. So that's what happens. So you can see here. Here's their survival. So you look at their survival. If you give them 10 gray of radiation, a mouse can live. If you give a mouse 12 gray of radiation, they're almost all dead. 13 gray, they're all dead. So this is the days post-radiation. If you give them 11 gray, they're here. Here we're giving them 12.5 gray, so they they just die. But once we give this compound, WR2721, look at that, they're all surviving. They're all surviving. They just keep eating, they're surviving. So we saw that, boom, a company started, called it Xariant. It's a radioprotective therapy for pancreatic cancer. And so there's the Xariant solution. You can look up Xariant online. The oral administration, radiation, you protect and you survive. That's sort of what they want to do. So repurposing an already approved drug that's used IV, we just made an oral formulation. So pharmacists know how to do that, very easy. Oral administration, organ protection, effective radiation, and that's how you live. So are there questions? On that Rust Patrol, I never filed intellectual property, no patent. It's all was secret formula. Why? Because all over Asia, they would have copied it anyway. And they would have put we did a little. So it was just a secret formula. So no filing of patents. Here, there were, of course, patents filed, and we protected it. So there are multiple ways to do this. Are there questions about starting a company? Okay, well, we'll pick it back up with nanotechnology next week. And remember, Google your little inventions. See if it's known, okay? All right, see you next week. If you're enjoying this series, give us a thumbs up and click the subscribe button, and that way you'll hear when we're coming out with new videos. There are no salaried employees in this organization. All the accounting, all the legal work, that's all done by friends of mine. The only thing that I have to pay for is the production work, and if you could help us out with that, I'd appreciate it. There's a link below where you can just click on that and help us in several different ways. Thank you.